Having asked the fundamental question regarding what is the real problem with Zimbabwe's monetary system, we discussed right through to the end, and we do propose what we believe to be a viable alternative, the one that will bring a lasting solution to Zimbabwe's monetary problem. But if you are a student of monetary economics, or you're somebody who wants to understand how money works and how money functions, please listen right through to the end. Because if you stop somewhere in the middle, you miss out. And I want you to don't regard the fact that it's a very long video of about 1.5 hours. I think the issues discussed are worth your time and your effort. It's actually a very comprehensive lecture. Yes, thanks. Greetings. I hope you are well wherever you are. My name is Dr Philani L Ndlovu. I have been listening and watching from the sidelines and the terraces since the release of a new currency in Zimbabwe, which was recently announced by John Mushayabanu, the governor of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. So it seems like the Zimbabwean dollar has been phased out, and the new currency called the Zimbabwe Gold, or ZiG, has taken over. So the media has been abuzz with comments. Everybody seems to be throwing in their 2 cents opinion. Some are throwing in billion-dollar opinions on the same matter. And I've been listening. I didn't have time. I didn't want to spend time. And besides, I didn't think I understood enough about this currency to be able to even throw in a comment. So I have been listening to a lot of other people's views and opinions. But I'm going to speak here from the point of view and perspective of, being an academic lawyer who has actually studied money. My Master of Laws thesis actually was based on money. If you have time, you can just go into internet and look for the name Philani L Ndlovu. Then look for a dissertation titled Juridical Constraints of Monetary Sovereignty, Implications for International Economic Law. That was the title of the thesis, rather of the dissertation. That was at master's level. So if you can just go into the internet, it will give you interesting reading, I must say. So from my understanding of money, I thought I would then pass a comment on how I understand Zimbabwe's monetary situation, how I understand Zimbabwe's monetary problems, looking at it particularly from the fundamental principles of money. Hence, I have titled my discussion, Fundamental Principles of Money, Zimbabwe's Failed Monetary System and the Only Solution. Yeah, remember, I'm saying the only solution. So if you don't think it's the only solution, that's your own point of view. But just take a back seat and listen as we discuss. As I have already said, I try to be very systematic in this discussion, but of course not comprehensive. As I have already indicated above, I'm trying to discuss this issue from a conceptual as well as a theoretical point of view. It's one thing to pass comments about the Zimbabwe gold, that is the ZiG currency, just maybe based on blind optimism and the hope that this time around the authorities have come up with a magic formula that would enable Zimbabwe's monetary system to be stabilized just by bringing in the name gold. Therefore, we assume that maybe this is the magic formula that the country has always required. So we are going to look at, we are discussing this thing from the point of view of, with these principles in the background. principles of monetary economics. We are not going to delve into details about the principles of monetary economics, monetary production, what are the factors that must be considered in monetary production, issues of money supply, how do you determine your different money types of money and money supply, your money one, money two, M1, M2, M3, those aggregates as you sometimes have them. So we will not delve deep into those issues, but we're just going to, on the surface, talk about monetary economics, monetary law, as well as monetary authority. Now, as I've already said, you don't just wake up one day and take a piece of paper and then write a number on that piece of paper, call one piece of paper a 10 zig, and call another one a 20 zig, and call another one 100 zig, as you daydream and write figures on a piece of paper. You see, monetary production must actually be based on principles of monetary economics. We are going to discuss some of these as we go on, but remember that there are different types of monies. We have got your commodity monies, you've got your fiat currencies or fiat monies, and then you've got your fiduciary monies, and you got your bank money, all those different types of money. You must, so like I said, there is M1, M2. Those must actually be based on some formula, based on some considerations of fundamental economic requirements that an economic environment must meet in order for it to sustain a monetary system. So without any deference to these basic and fundamental principles of monetary economics, you can't create a stable money. And then issues of monetary law, as we are going to be looking at it, I was asking myself just a simple question to say, but was the law changed before the adoption of the ZIG? Because as far as I know, Zimbabwe's money is defined in terms of a dollar. That is in terms of the Reserve Bank Act. But maybe there has been a change or an amendment of the Act which I missed. If anyone knows about it, please just give me a ring and remind me of that amendment which I might have missed. So those are issues of monetary law, and then issues of the monetary authority. So the authority that issues money, is it the Reserve Bank? And then there is the president. What role does the president of the country play rather? As we are going to be looking at some of the sections of the Reserve Bank Act below, we will want to answer some of these questions. But let me just indicate that, you see, the credibility and the integrity of the monetary authority is very, very important. As we are going to see when we look at Zimbabwe's monetary system, how integrity or lack of integrity, more than anything, has been the problem. So the problem is not the bond note, the problem is not the bearer check, the problem is not the Zimbabwean dollar. The problem is the lack of credibility and the lack of integrity on the authority that issues that money. But that we will discuss it as we go further. Now, let's just look at this issue of the origins of money. Because remember, for us to even begin to fathom what money must do, we must understand how money began. Now, people have been involved in trade since time immemorial. They've been involved in exchanging things. Some in the ancient past, people were using this method of trade based on barter system. It's still being used in the traditional communities in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, and everywhere else, where when somebody has a need, for instance, you may want to buy shoes for your child who's going to school, but you may not have the money. So you may take a hen or a chicken or a cock or a goat to whoever makes or manufactures shoes. Then you give them that fowl or you give them that goat or whatever, or you even bring a bag of maize, and then you can be given a uniform for your child, a pair of shoes for your child, and so on and so forth. That is a system called barter system. So it is the oldest system of trade, other than, in fact, older than the monetary system. Then the monetary system got introduced at a certain point in different communities. And so you've got, first of all, it begins as commodity monies, where if you read the Bible, they talk about shekels, they talk about, ounces, and yeah, those different measures. So sometimes it would be a metal, a pure metal, where somebody needs something, they want to buy, so they weigh a particular metal. It could be gold, it could be copper, it could be bronze, it could be iron, it could be. So when you look at the times of Jesus Christ, when they are talking about a denarius and so on, those were coins that were circulating. So they were commodity monies in a way. Some were using livestock. I think I've given the example of goats and chickens. And then later on, with some of these treasurable, commodities or metals such as silver and gold, you find that they then, in different parts of the world, Europe and elsewhere, they would then have these smiths. So a smith would be a kind of a person who collects gold or collects silver or whatever precious metal it might be. And so people would then take their gold and deposit it there by that smith. And then sometimes maybe they want the smith to create a crown, make a crown, manufacture a crown for them, or manufacture jewelry or whatever. And so sometimes they would leave their gold there with the smith, and then if they wanted it, they would go back to that smith at some point and collect that gold or that silver. But usually then the smith would write them a receipt to say, I have received so many ounces of gold from so and so. Maybe, for instance, somebody could weigh their gold at a weight of, say, 1 pound. A pound is a weight. For those who may not know, a pound is a weight. So you would have your pounds, you would have your dollars, you would have your shillings. So the owner of the metal would then leave it would deposit the metal with that smith, and it would be left there. And then, so the smith would write a receipt to say, I have received 1 pound from so and so. So then he would inscribe words to say, I promise to pay the bearer on demand, which is to imply that anybody who carries that receipt will, if he presents that receipt to that particular smith, then a pound of gold or a pound of silver, whatever it might be, would then be weighed and be given to them. So in actual fact, the origin of the banknotes came about as a result of these smiths, private smiths, acting as reserve systems, so that somebody could just come and deposit their gold there. So they would take that receipt and then go meet everybody else. And if they wanted to buy anything, they would walk into a shop and say, hey, take this receipt. I have left my gold with so and so, it's 1 pound. So you just take this receipt and give me the food that I want or that I need. If you need to redeem this gold for yourself, just take this receipt, go to that particular smith, they will weigh the 1 pound or the 2 pounds or whatever number of pounds and give to you. So that's the origin of the money system. And so that money was based on what then was called a commodity. Hence, it was a commodity standard. That's the birth of the commodity standard. So when you read the books like your Adam Smith, An Inquiry into the Causes of the Wealth of Nations, or you read the works of the likes of Ricardo. Ricardo was a British economist, and so was who's this Adam Smith. So those are people who began to speak about money way back then. But so we are saying that the commodity money was based on um, the commodity money was based on actually the deposit of a commodity such as your gold, your silver, your copper, or even stocks. So you would deposit something tangible and then you'd be given a receipt. So that money would then be backed. That's why we say it is backed, or it is anchored on a commodity. So we have been told that the ZiG is also anchored on a commodity. We want to believe that, but as somebody was saying somewhere, we have no way of verifying whether there are any gold deposits in the vaults of the RBZ to the extent that we are told they are. Maybe they are there, I don't know. But as I have said, the issue here is not a question of whether there are enough gold deposits in the vaults or not. It's the question of the integrity of the authority issuing the money. And the integrity and the credibility is the one thing that has been eroded very, very significantly in the Zimbabwean context, such that to now believe the authenticity of the statements being made raises more questions than it provides answers. Yes, so I did allude to the fact that there are different types of monies. I think I mentioned the fiat money, the commodity money, the fiduciary money, and the commercial banks money. Now, where do we begin? I think we've already covered the commodity money in the preceding slide presentation. Now, let's talk about the fiat. The word fiat is just a legal term to mean a decree. So a fiat is a decree, a fiat is a law, a fiat is an order. So what do we mean then by a fiat money? A fiat money is a money that is based on an order. It's based on a promise. It's based on, a decree. So it's like, I gave an example of somebody taking a piece of paper and writing one zig or £1 or £1 or $1 on it, and taking another piece of paper of almost the same size or slightly bigger, and then writing $2 or £10 or whatever figure they write. So why do we say it's fiat money? It's because it is not based on any commodity or any tangible material. It is only based on the promise of the one of the issuing authority. So if the issuing authority says this paper is worth £1 or this paper is worth £10, then that's what it is. So there's no intrinsic value of any kind in the paper itself. There's no intrinsic value of any kind in the paper itself. So for that reason, you find that the value of that money and its usability very much depends on how credible the issuing authority is. So it's like we have got certain monetary systems where you find that the fiat money works very, very well. It is stable. It is not backed by any commodity. But why does it work in some countries and not in others? There are quite a number of explanations, of course, some of which we will discuss below. The issues of the type of reserve system that is applied, as well as the credibility of the authority issuing the money. For instance, you'll agree with me that Zimbabwe's money was always a fiat-based money from maybe 1980 until about 2003. It used to be stable until 2003. So what happened? Credibility was lost in 2003 when we will see, as we discussed, but there was an interference with the production of money when the executive hand became too heavily involved in the production of money, then that's when everything went upside down. Everything went into a tailspin. So the tailspin has got something to do not with the paper on which the money is written, but on the lack of credibility of the authority issuing the money. So talking then about the reserve systems, you will know that you might probably know that the American dollar is a fiat. It's based on a fiat standard. It's just a decree. There's nothing to back it up. And that thing was established sometime, the Reserve Bank Charter of 1913. That's it was drawn then. And for interest's sake, the Reserve Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, is not a state-owned thing. It's a privately owned thing. If you want to understand more about that, you can look for a book by Edward Griffin, a book that is titled The Creature from Jekyll Island. It's such an interesting read because it touches on too many things, and it actually backs up the speculation about the Titanic and the sinking of the Titanic and how it might have been a conspiracy, because some of the leading business people of the time who boarded the Titanic, which sank, and it seems like they had been in competition with some of those who are surviving, even whose businesses are surviving even up to the present day. Let me not mention any names. Some of them are very well-established foundations in the USA and the banks and so on. But the point here is that based on a decree, based on an order, based on a charter, that money then obtains a credibility and stability. Which is to say, if there was stability in Zimbabwe's monetary system, there was likely going to be, if there was stability in the authority and the credibility in the authority, there would be stability. So the lack of stability has got nothing to do with the name dollar. As they are changing the name dollar because they think maybe there is something ominous there to do with the word dollar, but that's not the problem, because a dollar is a weight anyway. So if they were going to say weigh a gold and keep it in the reserve and sustain it in terms of a commodity, that thing would probably be stable. But anyway, so as far as the fiat money is concerned, it is a money that is based on just a declaration. That's why when the person making the declaration is credible, then the money will be stable. But if the person making the declaration is not credible, that money can't be stable. It's as simple as that. So, like I said, so those are fiat monies, the commodity money. Well, the fiduciary monies are also based on, somebody holding commodities on behalf of another. And then, of course, taking into account that commercial banks can also issue their own checks, which are internal. For instance, a bank like Barclays, under normal circumstances, would issue Barclays checks and then be able to, back that up. So it is still money when it's a check. Even your EFTs and your bank deposits, those are money. So they are part of the account for the monetary supply. They are not exactly excluded from monetary supply. They are part and parcel of it. We've been talking about money, and we've been looking at why people would want to use money. Now, money must serve as a store of value, or it serves also as a unit of account, and it is a medium of exchange, and it is legal tender. So what do we mean by saying that money gets to be valued as a store, used as a store of value? It's like if you ask me to do some work for you, I may do that work and then ask you to pay me a certain amount of money. Then when you have paid me, I take that money and I can deposit it in the bank. Even when I'm not using it, I can walk around, drive around, knowing that if I need to use money, I will go to the bank, I collect my money, then I use it. So sometimes you sell your property. Could be you sell a house, you sell a car, or whatever property you do sell, and then you take that money and place it in a bank. So if you've sold, say, your house for R1,000,000 or 1,000,000 ZiG, whatever it might be, you take that money and keep it in the bank. So when you keep the money in the bank, it's like you're keeping the house in the bank. Because when you want another house, you can walk into the bank, get your 1,000,000 rands, go buy a similar house, a house of similar value, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, money is used as a store of value. It stores the value of commodities or your property, such as your house, your car, anything. Then as a unit account, I gave an example of you asking me to do some work for you. How do we determine the compensation that I'll get for the services that I render to you? So I could say to you, okay, I'm going to do this work for you for the next 5 or 6 hours, and you're going to pay me 1,000 rands. So you're going to pay me 100 ZiG, whatever you might call it, whatever you might agree. So it is a unit of account. And even so when we are expressing the value of things, when we are talking about transactions between people, it could be trade, it could be investment, whatever, we are going to express it in the unit of so in the money. For instance, in Zimbabwe, you would have said you use a dollar until last week when they say you can now use a ZiG, whatever. In South Africa, it would be around a rand. In the United Kingdom, it could be a pound. In the US, it could be a dollar. But in the Eurozone system, they would say a euro or a Japanese yen, whichever is being used. So that's as a store of value. And it is also a medium of exchange. Remember, we spoke briefly about the barter trade, where we said people were exchanging commodities. But now, because money has that universal character, it can store value of anything, and it can be carried around and be applied everywhere else. So you find that money then gets to be used as a medium of exchange. Then I said it can also be used as a store of value. Sorry, I meant as legal tender. That is. So as legal tender, it means if I owe you something, maybe I've caused you some injury through a delictual action or whatever, any obligation that has arisen, we then tend to express those obligations by use of legal tender. In other words, if I have caused you any damage or injury, and then you ask for compensation, I can give you money. So if our legal tender is Zim dollar, then I must give you the Zim dollar. If you are operating in a rand economy like South Africa, and somebody owes you an obligation and they pay you in South African rand, you have an obligation to accept it, because it is legal tender. You cannot reject it and say, while you are in South Africa, you want to be paid in US dollars or in British pounds. It doesn't work. So money works as legal tender. In other words, if I owe you an obligation in monetary terms, and then I come and give you the money, and you refuse to accept it, then I'm discharged of that obligation. A very simple example could be, maybe I am in Zimbabwe, and then I owe you maybe money that could be converted into US dollars, but I have to pay from the Zimbabwean jurisdiction. If I give you the Zimbabwean dollar or the Zimbabwean ZiG, it's enough. If you don't want it and you insist on being paid in US dollar or pound, then it's your problem, because if I've given you what is regarded as legal tender in terms of the law, you have an obligation and a duty to accept it. Failure to accept it means the debtor is discharged from the obligation. So that's what it means to say money serves as legal tender. That must be understood. The interesting characteristics of money among many, of course, that is characteristics of a good monetary system, is that one, there must be integrity of the monetary system. Number two, there must be credibility. Number three, there must be predictability leading to stability. So in other words, there cannot be stability when there's no integrity, when there's no credibility, and when there's no predictability. Now, how do these issues arise and apply in the context of Zimbabwe? The truth is that Zimbabwe's monetary system has gone through many changes, as you shall see as we proceed below. There's been so many changes that, the executive issues orders ad nauseam, and even the courts have also not been consistent in their interpretation and application of law. For instance, you find that in one case, some business people transacted on the basis of a foreign currency, the US dollar. Then, in the course of time, the government, the executive, issued a statutory instrument to say that it was now illegal to trade in US dollars. So you can imagine somebody whose debt, a creditor who is being owed a debt in US dollars now has to be paid in Zim dollars. The Zimbabwe dollar has been very, very unstable over time. So people's savings and investments and efforts have been extinguished just at the stroke of a presidential pen. That's how it has always been. And we expect people to work hard. You hear a president who says Zimbabwe is open for business, but there is no monetary stability. The value of money depends on the words that issue out of his mouth. And sometimes he's always changing like a chameleon. So the issue of integrity, those that issue money must stand by the words that they say. You can't issue money today and then change your idea tomorrow. People are holding on to the piece of paper that is called money, and they wake up the following day to be told, no, this one has been demonetized. So what do they do with it? There's not even a succession or exchange facility. Sometimes you find that it's not even worth it. And the short notice at which money sometimes gets changed is those people who are in the villages, the grandmothers and grandfathers there who are not even keeping abreast with the internet. They remain there holding on to the old notes when you find that the exchange window has expired and they are still holding on to it. And remember, that person got those banknotes, not that they were just freely handed to them, but they worked. There's some industry, there's some labor that was involved. There was some effort involved in acquiring those banknotes and coins. So when they get demonetized and the person doesn't get the opportunity to redeem them until the redemption window gets closed, honestly, that's very unfair. In fact, it's criminal, to say the least, because people's efforts are just being extinguished whenever the executive feels like doing so. And there is no greater haste than that. There is no worse of a haste than just extinguishing people's wealth, extinguishing people's assets, just at the stroke of a pen and just through an announcement. But that's what has been happening since 2003, or even slightly earlier than that. So the word integrity means you stand by the word that you've spoken. So when you speak a word, you stand by that word. So you are almost like what the Bible calls a spiritual pilgrim, one who swears to his head. In other words, if somebody says, I'm going to do this, they will do it whether it's convenient or it's not convenient. That's what it means to be a pilgrim. That's what it means to have integrity. somebody who can issue a statement, come 10 years, you will meet them, they will still say the same thing. That is what integrity is. So the authority issuing the money must have integrity. People who depend on money that is issued by that authority must actually be able to depend on that. So if we say we are using a dollar, we must use a dollar. And when it comes to issues of money supply, there must be a system, there must be some calculations, some statistics. Monetary supply, it can't just be changed anyhow, anywhere, anytime. For instance, maybe let me just edit here. How does a normal monetary system get money out of the reserve bank to the people? Money goes out from the reserve bank through purchases of assets by the bank. So when the bank issues banknotes, what does it do? It takes that money and then goes into the open market and buys assets. Those assets could be movables or immovables. It could be assets such as stocks, instruments, investment instruments, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, different kinds of assets that the bank, the reserve bank, acquires using that money. So the reserve bank then gets those assets and keeps them for itself. That is when it wants to increase the money supply in the market. And when the bank, through its observations and calculations, observations, of course, of the economic and financial fundamentals, if it wants to reduce the money supply, what does it do? It takes those assets that it had bought and sells them back to the market. Then the market, when the market receives those assets, it gives money back to the bank. So the bank is able to increase monetary supply or reduce monetary supply. And the bank is not going to print more money than the assets it has. Than it always observes how much money is required in the market. So the Reserve Bank only releases enough money as required in the market. That's how it works. So, because we have governments who sometimes want to, they want to finance certain public programs. For instance, when a government wants to finance a war, they can just write more paper and circulate it. It happened in the US in around 1873, 74, thereabout. If you can get a hold of a book by, who's this Friedman? A man called Milton Friedman. He wrote a book called Money Mischief. If you can get a hold of that book, Money Mischief, you will learn a lot from it. But what happened is that the US government decided, because they were facing a war, so they just wrote more paper, brought more paper money into the market. And then that affects people's wealth, because when more paper money is brought into the market, it has an inflationary effect even on money earned earlier through sweat and hard labor. So sometimes you find that in order to finance a war, or as in the case of Zimbabwe, when the ruling party wants to finance elections, they just write money and bring these young boys, the green bombers and everybody else. They just give them money like that to go and carry out the campaign work, some of which is conducted in the most unscrupulous and the most disgusting way. So money then gets to be written. Just large volumes of paper money are written, which are not even backed by any commodity, any principle. They are written and given to those young boys and girls to go and carry out the work. So that's how. So there are no assets. The bank is not even buying any assets from the public or from the market. It just writes banknotes and gives them. That gives then credibility to the statement which says that Zimbabwe has 3 daily newspapers. They are the Herald, the Chronicle, and the Zim Dollar. They are published daily. Each day, there's a new currency in Zimbabwe. So the monetary system has no integrity. You can't rely on them. So that's why people can't even take the money to the bank when they have US dollar or British pound, because once your money is in the bank, you could be told that you're no longer allowed to trade in foreign currency or to hold foreign currency accounts. All foreign currency accounts are frozen. Now all balances must be converted into the bond, into the RTGS or into the ZIG. And this happens far too frequently. So the money itself does not have any integrity, in fact, any credibility, because the system that issues it has no integrity. So you can't rely on the money that you are holding on to in Zimbabwe, especially the money printed in Zimbabwe. That's why Zimbabweans don't want to trade in the Zimbabwe dollar, even when they are there inside the country. They would rather use foreign currencies because those monies have more integrity, they are more credible than the Zimbabwean dollar. So because of this lack of integrity, lack of credibility, there is lack there's lack of integrity, lack of credibility, and therefore lack of predictability. Because of the lack of predictability, the next issue then is the issue of lack of stability. It can't be stable. You can't rely on it. You don't know what tomorrow brings, because every day the governor of the Reserve Bank has a new story about the money. Every day the president is excited about a new money. Every day you have got to learn the features of a new money. Every day. Why does it have to be like that? You see, I remember an interesting statement I came across when I was reading about money. Remember in 1999 when most European countries joined the Eurozone. For instance, the Germans abandoned their Deutschmark, and then the French abandoned their francs. And then the British were also invited to abandon the pound and go into the Eurozone so that they would also begin to use the euro as their own currency. You know, I came across this comment where somebody in the UK said, hey, there's no way we can destroy the pound. This thing is 800 years old. So one of the reasons for the strength and the stability of the British pound is that it is old. There's respect for it. When you have earned a pound, you know it is stable, you are going to have it. So remember, we spoke about the store of value, the use of money as a store of value. You know, when you have a pound, you have value. We will not wake up one day with the Queen or with the Prime Minister saying, we are doing away with this thing, now we are going to give you a new one. So those are lessons that Zimbabwe must learn, but there is reluctance in learning them. And that's why Zimbabwe's monetary system remains. We've been saying that Zimbabwe's monetary problems have got to do with the lack of stability and the lack of integrity, lack of credibility, lack of so it's lack of integrity leading to lack of credibility, leading to lack of predictability, leading to lack of stability. Now, just take an overview, a summary. Of course, I've not captured all the details here, but I said that between 1980 and 2003, the Zim dollar was used. Of course, it had its own challenges. It did go through inflation, but that was not hyperinflation. That was normal inflation. Until around 2003, when the country almost experienced a bank run. Of course, I will give time at some point to how, from my own understanding, the invasion of the farms uh, had an impact on the monetary system. Because remember, most of those farms were actually benefiting from the banks, maybe obtaining loans to erect fences, to build or to create what you call fire guards, or for crops, or for livestock, for medicine. So a farmer would walk into a bank and obtain a loan and say, when the crop harvest time comes, when the tobacco harvest time comes, I'm going to harvest and I'm going to come and pay. So remember, in the year 2000, when some of those farmers had planted crop, you find that war veterans and everybody else walked into those farms and began to occupy them. And so when they did, that farmer from Nyamaendlovu, that farmer from Victory, or that farmer from Zarabani would walk to the Barclays Bank or to Standard Bank or any other bank, Zim Bank, whichever, and say to them, I'm no longer able to pay you because the crop that I had provided as collateral security is in a farm that is no longer mine, because the farm has been occupied by the indigenous people. Call it a farm invasion, whatever you call it. But the impact on the monetary system has not been deeply investigated. So you find that the credibility of the monetary system was lost from that time. Because now, what happened to those loans that were secured by means of the farms, the title deeds, and so on? Because though the land was there, the title deed had become obsolete, it was no longer useful. So we then had too many bad debtors from that. Nobody is talking about the impact of that bad debt is occasioned by those unplanned and unpredicted occupations of farms, which were not very systematic. So you find that from around 2002, 2003, the impact of those farm occupations or farm invasions, whatever I might call them, on the monetary system began to be felt. So the country almost experienced a bank run. There was a time when people were queuing up for money because the money supply somehow had been overstripped by inflation. You find that people would now line up and queue up for money at the banks and so on. So, everybody, like on a month end, when people got paid, everybody would walk to the bank and demand their money. And I'm sure you would know, from a monetary economics point of view, that the value of the banks and bank coins in circulation in any normal monetary system would constitute about 10 to 15% of all the monetary obligations in the country. So the only reason why the people continue, why money continues to be sufficient even though the banknotes and coins only constitute about 15% of the value, it's because people don't walk to the bank at the same time to ask for their money in the form of banknotes. So as where the normal monetary system is functioning, the banking system is fine. People are fine with checks, or they are fine with issuing EFTs, electronic funds transfers. So people don't ask, they don't demand the banknotes. But now, where the money system has crumbled, like what happens in Zimbabwe, everybody walked to the bank and demanded their money. So that's what we call a bank run. And so, as a response to that bank run, the governor of the Reserve Bank at that time was Gideon Gono. That's when he came up with the Pira checks. You remember those Pira checks, those were there. And then the Pira checks were used for quite some time, but still, because the economic fundamentals were not fixed, you find that inflation continued to skyrocket. And the polarization politically, the careless talk by the executive. Robert Mugabe was one of the most careless talkers of all time. The man didn't care about the outcome of his words. He was plain arrogant. So arrogance then killed the money. Remember, you can rig elections and you can do anything else, but you cannot rig money, because money is based on values, based on effort. People's energies cannot be rigged. You can't just make an executive pronouncement and then assume that people are just going to be happy with what you've said and the money will be stable. No, people withdraw their money. So there was a bank run in 2003, then the response was bearer checks, and then that hyperinflation which beat the 1923 election, 1923 inflation of Germany. When we were in school studying history, the German monetary system used to be, that example of a collapsed system. The 1923 inflation, where we were told that somebody would push a wheelbarrow full of money to just go and buy a loaf of bread. Zimbabwe went beyond that, because Zimbabwe used all the zeros, all the digits, from thousands to millions, from millions to billions, from billions to trillions. So all the digits were used. The only country in the world to have printed trillions is Zimbabwe. I don't think there is any other. So that's what happened. So when that happened, you find that they then had to abandon that money because of the hyperinflation. At some point, people were asked to slice the zeros, reduce the zeros. Just pretend that when you are carrying a trillion, the other 6 zeros are not there. So it's like taking a pen and taking a banknote and striking off those zeros. At some point, it was the most ridiculous thing of saying that big $1 coin which had been used and then abandoned because of inflation, now you can go back, take it and use it. That's what happened. Very ridiculous. So when they got to a point where they realized that no, this is not working, then they went into dollarization, where a basket of currencies was used: your pound, your dollar, your rand, your pula. At some point, I think there was this German one, sorry, the Indian rupee. I think they used all monies were in that basket. At some point, some people were insinuating that Zimbabwe should join the rand economy, but out of arrogance and pride, they refused. But anyway, so dollarization, basket of currencies. And that was around 2009. I think it ran during the time of the government of national unity, where Morgan Tsvangirai was the prime minister and Tendai Biti was the minister of finance and so on. Things seemed to be stable during that time. But hey, as soon as ZANU-PF won again the election in 2013, it did away with that basket. Now we have bond notes and bond coins. So it also ran its own course with the new banknotes and new coins, and everybody was excited. The dollar is back in action. But because the fundamental principles guiding the production of money were never changed, it also suffered the same fate. And so, when it continued to go through inflation, then they brought in some genius called Mthuli Ncube as the new governor, or rather as the new minister of finance. And then we're told about RTGS, something very novel and something very, very interesting. I'm fast forwarding here. And then it also ran its course and it got exhausted. Now we have gotten Shayaban coming in with a zig. So it's all about when you have a problem. It's like when you have a problem with the previous one, you look for a new one. The one will also have a problem. If you've not changed yourself, it will remain the same. So the issue that must change is not the money, but the issue that must change is the authority issuing the money. It must stop creating new money, because that is what tampers with the integrity of the system and the credibility of the money. Nobody believes in Zimbabwean money, because whilst you are holding on to it, they are going to change it. That's where the problem is. It's not a matter of whether you have backed it with gold or you've backed it with anything, because like I said, who goes into the Reserve Bank vaults to check whether that gold is there, and so on and so forth? So as long as our knowledge about it is limited, our trust of it will also be restricted and limited. When we began our discussion, we did take note of the fact that there are some important principles when it comes to monetary production. We said that there are principles of monetary economics. Then we said there are principles of monetary law. So when you look at those principles of monetary economics, monetary law, they affect monetary production, and they will also affect issues of the stability of that monetary system. So when it comes to Zimbabwe, you find that the Reserve Bank Act, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Act, that's chapter 2215, is the law that regulates the monetary system and the production of money generally. Now, if you remember, I did say earlier on that I was not aware of any amendments on the Reserve Bank Act regarding the introduction of the ZiG, that is the Zimbabwe gold, that's the ZiG currency that everybody seems to be excited about. So you find that in terms of the Reserve Bank Act, Section 6 says the functions of the bank shall be to regulate Zimbabwe's monetary system, to achieve and maintain the stability of the Zimbabwean dollar, not the Zimbabwean ZiG, the Zimbabwean dollar, and to foster the liquidity, solvency, stability, and proper functioning of the Zimbabwe's financial system, to advance the general economic policies of the government and supervise banking institutions, and to promote smooth operation of payment systems, and subject to Part 5, to formulate and execute the monetary policy of Zimbabwe. These are not the only provisions that we have in Section 6 or the sub-provisions, but I wanted to bring your attention to item B there, Section 6(1)(b). Says to achieve and maintain the stability of the Zimbabwean dollar. So legally speaking, if there is no change in the law, then the ZiG is a legal nullity. Why would people use money that is not catered for in law? Does the Zimbabwean law recognize a ZiG? Has it become legal tender? Is it on the basis of the statements issued by the governor of the Reserve Bank, Mr. Mshabani, or the president of the country? Should the production of money not be based on the law itself? So if the statutes do not have a ZiG as part of them, why should I accept ZiG as legal tender from somebody who proffers it to me? If I owe you a certain obligation monetary, and then you come to me, rather I come to you and give you a ZiG, are you obliged to accept it as legal tender? If you do not accept ZiG as legal tender, have you then broken any law? So it really matters that these things must be thrashed out. You see, I see a lot of excitement in the media. Some people are excited about the so-called stability of the ZiG, but I've not really had questions about the legal status of the ZiG, because surely we can't have a a Reserve Bank authority that just wakes up and introduces a currency without having considered whether the parliament has approved a law to amend the act and then to change from a dollar to a zig. So we can't just wake up using a zig when the law doesn't recognize a zig. So if you try to pay me, if you owe me a financial obligation and you try to pay me on the basis of a zig, do I not reserve the right to refuse to be paid in the zig? Because it's not legal tender according to the Reserve Bank Act chapter 2215. Those are the kind of questions that people must be asking. And the fact that the issuing authority can just wake up and come up with a name and give a name to a currency when the law does not recognize that thing, it is surely an indication that something is fundamentally wrong and flawed in the monetary system. We can't really be excited whether it is stable or not stable. It's neither here nor there. The issue that it is a legal nullity, it doesn't exist in law. So, and it also goes to show the lack of respect for the people and the lack of integrity that we spoke about much earlier, where you do not predict, you can't even read the law and look at the Reserve Bank Act and predict what the next development is going to be, because there are developments that are outside the law. They are outside the four corners of the statute, but people still have to adhere to them. Those are some of the problems that you find. So those are the issues that need to be addressed. The arbitrary introduction of monetary denominations or monetary, in fact, this is not even a denomination, because this is the adoption of a new currency. As we shall see in our discussion below, the president has powers to determine denominations, but determining a denomination is not the same as determining a currency. But because most of our people will not go deep into some of these questions to say, hey, does the president have the powers in terms of the law and the statute to do this? So people get very excited, and then people will just say, yeah, this is fine, so we have a new currency, blah, 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 blah. Everybody is excited about it. There's nothing wrong with being excited, but let's get excited on the basis of the right thing and the correct thing. Let us inquire into the law. Let us ask very critical and relevant questions so that we can bring our leadership into accountability, so that they can be made to think on their toes. They can't just wake up arbitrarily and on their whims and their capricious imaginations. They come up with a new currency and they expect every one of us to follow. It's like the country is what you call a banana republic. It's just like somebody's backyard tuck shop. That can't be. The country cannot be run on that basis, honestly. That is beyond acceptability. We have alluded to some of the issues here. Still looking at the Reserve Bank Act, that is chapter 2215. Section 7 says the powers of the bank, and it says, subject to this act, in the exercise of its functions, the bank may do any of the following. That is, make or cause to be made, or issue banknotes and coins in accordance with this act. So, like I said, if there is an amendment, then the issuance of the ZIG would be in accordance with the act. But if there has not been a change in the law, then surely the ZIG is an illegal nullity, as I have already said, because then it means the bank would have issued banknotes not in accordance with this act, because this act anticipates a dollar, doesn't anticipate a ZIG. And so we are saying the bank may accept money on a current account and collect money for customers, grant loans. I think those other things, those other issues are just there. You can read them on your own, subject to section 13, buy, sell, discount, and rediscount. I think it brings us back to the issue that I was saying about the management of the money supply, where the bank buys assets, sells assets, discounts or rediscounts assets. It can issue bills of exchange or your promissory notes drawn or issued for commercial, industrial, and agricultural purposes. But now, in the event of an unstable monetary system, those bills of exchange and those promissory notes issued for commercial and industrial or agricultural purposes, how can you rely upon them? Because you see, bills of exchange and promissory notes in those countries and those systems where there's monetary system stability, those instruments, those cambial instruments, can actually be used over a long period of time. So imagine in 2002, you had a bill of exchange or a promissory note drawn on the basis of the Zim dollar. And then the following year, it became a bearer check. And then it went through inflation to trillions. Then it was abandoned and dollarized. And then it went into a bond note, then RTGS, now ZIG. So how do you even expect to be holding on to a bill of exchange or a promissory note? What would it be denominated on? What is the value? How do you determine it when there is no stability? So commercial, industrial, and agricultural investments are hindered because you can't have promissory notes and bills of exchange based on an unstable currency. It doesn't work. So those bills, those notes, and other obligations of the state or statutory bodies, you also can't trust them. Treasury bills, in what currency are they denominated? So do you buy those treasury bills today in RTGS and then tomorrow you expect to be compensated in ZIG? How do you really work where there's such instability? So the issue of buying and taking exchange, hiring, or otherwise acquiring movable or immovable property necessary or convenient for the exercise of its functions and dispose of or deal in such property wherever necessary. As I did anchor this discussion, especially to do with the buying and selling assets, I said that this is a mechanism or a technique that the Reserve Bank uses to control and manage the supply, the monetary supply in the market. That's very, very important to take note of. So I then I ask the question, so what are the problems with Zimbabwe's monetary system? And then in my answer, I say it's authority. You see, Zimbabwe's monetary problem is the authority, the president. When I say the president, I don't mean in a personal capacity, like whether you're talking about Mugabe or talking about Mnangagwa. I'm talking about vesting monetary authority in the executive. That is the first problem. Unless that problem is resolved, there will never be monetary stability. Because you see, if a president, first and foremost, is a human being, is a self-interested human being, when he's vested with unlimited powers, there is that tendency and temptation to use them for personal purposes. I'm not saying that the presidents have done that. Please, it's a disclaimer. I'm just saying vesting monetary making power in the office of the president, exposes it to potential abuse and misuse. So the issue of the monetary authority must be looked into. An independent monetary authority would be more appropriate than vesting this power in the executive. Because surely when the president wakes up one day and finds that nurses and teachers are not paid, there's a temptation to just write money and give them, especially when they are on strike. So monetary making power must be vested in an authority that is independent of manipulation and the pressures. If, for instance, the executive were not in charge of monetary production, where there is need to pay the soldiers and the police, the state would have to borrow. It will have to find ways of raising money without the temptation of just taking pieces of paper and writing notes and denominations on them. That is very, very important. So the issue of the issue of monetary authority is very, very important. Section 40 of the Reserve Bank Act, chapter 2215 says the role of the Reserve Bank is to issue banknotes and coins. And it says, subject to subsection 3, the bank shall have the sole right to make or cause to be made and to issue banknotes in Zimbabwe. The same applies. Section 43 talks about coins. So it is the Reserve Bank, therefore, that issues coins and notes. And then look at subsection 2. It says the president shall determine the denominations, the designs, the form, or the material which shall be used in making these banknotes. Now, looking at this part which says denominations, design, form, or material, does it then empower the president to change the name of the currency from a dollar to a zig? Is that anticipated in section 40, subsection 2? It's a question that really has to be closely interrogated, because by denominations we mean whether we have a 10 rand dollar, we have a $10 bill or a $20 bill or a $100 bill or a $1,000 bill. That's what the denominations are. And then as for the design, well, not so long ago we had the bond note. Was it the bond note that had the Mbuyane and his portrait? I think that was design. Those issues are more aesthetic than of any economic value. They don't really put much pressure on the money. Whether you have Inkosulo Pemula on the banknote, or you have Mbuyane on the banknote, or you have Joshua Mkabugo on the banknote, or even President Mnangagwa himself, those are issues that are not material. They don't really affect the value of the money. Those issues are issues of design. They are more on the aesthetic side. They are just fancies. How about form or material? Whether it's going to be on plastic or it's going to be on paper, and so on and so forth. So those are the issues. Those are the powers that are vested in the president. We are saying the bank shall not issue any banknotes unless the minister, by statutory instrument, has specified the matters determined by the president in respect of these banknotes. So we have seen that the president may determine denominations, designs, form or material. But the issue of the name, really, is it anticipated here? Or does the president overstep his bounds and limits when he issues a new currency instead of the old currency that we had, particularly if he does so before there is any amendment of the Reserve Bank Act to accommodate a zig rather than a dollar? So it goes without saying that issuance of anything which is different from the dollar is actually overstepping the limits of the president. So that then brings us to the issue of legal tender of banknotes. We are saying a tender of a banknote which has been issued by the Reserve Bank and which has not been demonetized in terms of subsection 2 shall be legal tender in payment within Zimbabwe of the amount expressed in the note. Okay, that's straightforward, legal tender. But remember, we are saying issued, or not issued by the bank. which means, as we read earlier, we were told that the bank must issue banknotes according to this act. And we have noted that the word dollar is the one that is in the act and not the ZIG. So the ZIG then is not issued according to the act, which means it's not legal tender. If a ZIG has been, even if there's a statutory instrument that has been issued, we saw earlier in Section 40 that the president only tampers with denominations. He's allowed to determine denomination, design, form, and material. But we never found anything to say he may change the name of the currency altogether. So unless there is a prior change in the statute, then the president would have overstepped his limits, and therefore the ZIG would be a legal nullity. And taking it to courts, independent courts should be able to say, if for instance, somebody owes an obligation and pretends to pay in the ZIG and the creditor refuses that, I believe the creditor would be within his or her rights, because the ZIG, according to the law as it currently stands, is not Zimbabwe's currency. Only the dollar is. So the president may, by statutory instrument, call in and demonetize any banknotes issued by the bank, and shall likewise determine the manner in which and period within which payments of such banknotes shall be made to holders thereof. Now, another issue now of unlimited and unfettered power given to the president to demonetize banknotes, executive powers. People wake up in the morning and go to work. They don't ask the president whether to wake up or not. So why does it then get vested with the power to demonetize notes, to demonetize, to determine that they are no longer money? You see, this would work well if presidents were holy angels from heaven. The fact that they are humans, we don't want to impute any wrong motive upon them. But surely the issue of vesting unlimited and unfettered powers on an individual must really be brought into question. Because we are talking about people's labor, people's sweat, which must really be taken into account in everything, in determining these matters. So we have really looked at some of the problems, and one of the points that I have tried to underscore and state in many, many different ways is that the problem with Zimbabwe's monetary system is that it is run by the executive. So there are many different types of reserve bank systems. We have state-owned reserve banks, that is the Zimbabwean example. And I've heard people in South Africa saying they also want a South African Reserve Bank to be owned by the state. And I spoke to a certain gentleman and said, hey, be careful. If you don't know what you are asking for, please don't ask for it. Because as it stands, South Africa's Reserve Bank is privately owned with more than 50% stake held by some private individuals. I don't want to speculate and name which country they are from, but certainly, the last time I checked, they were not even South African. So they are state-owned reserve banks. The South African Reserve Bank is not state-owned. The Federal Reserve Bank of the US is not state-owned, but the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe is state-owned. So, and because of that, it vests power in the executive. Hence, this manipulation that more often than not is instigated by political maneuvering and so on. So you've got your independent reserve banks. I think that's the example of South Africa, Federal Reserve, and so on. Of course, the issue of the independence of the Federal Reserve Bank was once brought into question. I think that was when Alan Greenspan was the governor then. And I remember reading a book written by this lady Maria Lastra Losa, she actually explained very well why the Federal Reserve Bank system is not state-owned with its 18 governors. And of course, as I said, the way it was drawn in 1913, I refer you again to Edward Griffin, the creature from the Jekyll Island. It might help you there. So then we have our fractional reserve systems, where we allow every bank here and there to have its own mini reserve system, so that we would say have your Barclays Bank issuing banknotes and backing them up, and then the Standard Bank also issuing banknotes and backing them up, so that at the end of the day there's a competition in the market to say, are Standard Bank notes more credible than the Barclays ones, or the Zimbank ones, or the Stanbic ones, and so on and so forth. Then the issue of free monetary production. I think if you want to understand a lot more about this, you can look for a gentleman called Hulsman, Professor. Hey, I'll write the name here for you so that you can take a note of it and follow it. Yeah, but those are different theories of monetary production, as you may want to. But I underscore the fact that an independent bank, reserve bank, run by private interests for profit, would most likely be the best option for Zimbabwe, taking away the control of the reserve bank from the state and giving it to private interests. Because surely the state has done a mess. It has put everybody else in a mess when it comes to the management of the monetary system. Well, we have spoken about so much, seen so many, tried. First, we looked at the principles that must guide our thinking. The principles of monetary economics, monetary law, they must guide your thinking when you think about money. Because monetary production and money supply must be determined by sound principles of monetary economics, backed strongly by sound principles of monetary law, so that there is no arbitrary change of money, alteration of money, extinguishing it from time to time, and so on. And so, as my conclusion, maybe let me draw your attention to the fact that Zimbabwe's monetary system is in a mess because it is controlled by the executive, and sometimes there is executive meddling occasioned by need to finance programs, using just that authority to write money, the resource privilege to write money. And as you will know, there was that era when people were said to be burning money. Then there was that era where you found that people at the Reserve Bank would print money using that authority. And then they would take that money and walk into the black market, the streets of Bulawayo there, the World Bank, I'm sure you know it, and all the other streets of the country in Zimbabwe. And so use those Zimbabwe dollar notes to buy maybe the rand, the pula, the pound, the US dollar, the rupee. And then so you find that those who are at the Reserve Bank, those who are high ranking and have authority, they can actually acquire these hard currencies just as the stroke of a pen or at the click of a mouse. So they click a mouse, they print Zimbabwean dollars which are not of any value. They take that paper, walk into the street and buy the real currency, your rand, your pula, and your pound. And then who knows? They take that money, some of it gets stashed in some hidden place. We've heard about accounts in Panama and some other offshore accounts. We don't want to speculate about that, but hey, get this thing right. There is need to rethink this issue. Thank you very much for taking your time to listen to this video through to the end. I hope it has really blessed you. Thank you.